Thank you, everybody, for joining again. Today, we're talking about managing managing commercial software risk. Know when your software is malware. So let's kind of give a quick introduction to Reversing Labs. So to kind of give a quick introduction of who we are the trusted authority in software and file security with solutions that have continually improved over the last 15 years. We have a threat repository that contains over 40 billion examples of both malware and goodware, and that number continues to grow as our threat research team continues to add um, more examples, analyzing, categorizing new instances of malware and goodware daily. So again, that 40 billion file repository is about 7 times larger than our closest competitor. As a matter of fact, that malware feed, that threat intel feed, actually feeds into 60 of the leading cybersecurity companies that you actually might already be aware of, that you're very familiar with. So again, that's something that our partners definitely rely on. And we've received numerous accolades as part of our partner channel program, a lot of us being recognized by industry analysts like Gartner. But something that we're really proud of that is more recent is we're actually a primary contributor to the latest edition of the Verizon data breach incident report as of this year. So we were actually a big contributor for the software supply chain security part of that report. So something we're really proud of, and something that we're really proud to hang our hat on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our panelists, myself included. So again, my name's Joe Coletta. I'm a senior product marketing manager here at ReversingLabs. I've been in the application security space for about 10 years, so I've been able to segue that into my role here at ReversingLabs. And I'm going to pass it over to my esteemed colleague, looking like he's in the room with me. I wish he was.
Hey, Joe.
Brian, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. So I'm Brian Self. I've been in security now for going on 20 plus years. My joke is that the gray hair is starting to show and all. So definitely in this career, those who've been in it for a while understand that. I've in previous incarnations, I've been a penetration tester, AppSec engineer, AppSec architect. Pretty much have done most everything in security minus forensics. And now here at Versing Labs, I'm able to dabble into that as well. So currently a field CSO here. And nice to meet everyone. And thank you, Joe. Appreciate the
Of
opportunity to
course.
introduce myself.
Excellent. All right. So kicking off into the meat of the presentation, specifically talking about commercial software. So whether you call it third-party commercial software, COTS, commercial and vendor software, what have you, this represents a massive gap in the software supply chain.
Mhm.
And if you need any further proof, look no further than what happened to SolarWinds and 3CX within the last few years. Both were the targets of nation-state sponsored tampering campaigns that affected hundreds of organizations. So what we're seeing is an ongoing trend of bad actors exploiting the good reputation of trusted software providers to distribute things like malware, again, tampering, exposed secrets to hundreds, if not thousands of businesses. Again, it's not just SolarWinds and 3CX, CodeCov, Circle CI, these again, trusted software providers that were the target of these types of campaigns. So again, beyond the risk factor that these commercial software presents as an attack vector, there's also a rising temperature across the compliant landscape. So we're talking things like legislation both in the U.S. and Europe, dictating to organizations that they must practice due diligence in assessing vendor software risk. So when we talk about examples, we're talking about things like the EU, in Europe, for example, the Cyber Resilience Act and the Digital Operational Resilience Act, or DORA for short. There are stipulations within those legislations that specifically call out due diligence in preventing any cyber threats, regardless if they come from proprietary software or a third-party software provider. So that's actually written in black and white within those legislations, and they have global ramifications. Here in the U.S., obviously you have guidances from agencies like NIST, CISA, the White House, but data privacy laws like the California Consumer Privacy Act, GDPR, which again is an EU regulation, but again, global ramifications, apply in the events that breaches to third-party software providers can actually expose your business to risk. So again, in other words, even if your third-party vendor is the one that gets popped, you can be held liable. So that's the kind of the
Mhm.
temperature of the market that we're in right now. Next slide, please. So, okay, cool. Let's take a look at the scope of the problem by the numbers. So, just to kind of put some qualitative numbers behind this problem. ReversingLabs, for example, we actually published our State of Software Supply Chain Security report earlier this year, and we actually found a 1,300% increase in software supply chain breaches from the scope of testing, the scope of the research, which is from 2021 through the end of 2023. Now, some of that was related to malicious open source packages, commercial open source, excuse me, malicious open source packages, but commercial software did play a hand in that, and it highlights the issue. So if we want to get more into specifics on the risk that commercial software represents, we can look no further than our friends at Verizon in their most recent Verizon DBIR report, which for the first time in its history, just called out software supply chain breaches as its own threat category. So if we want to zero in on commercial software as an attack vector, Verizon pointed out a 68% increase in software supply chain breaches stemming from third-party development, so third-party vendors, essentially. Lastly, we have some quantitative evidence, I should say, excuse me, that the current approaches of solving this problem are not built to task. So a recent Gartner report measured that 83% of cyber risk professionals still find threats in their vendor software even after they've deployed it. And that's after implementing measures like security questionnaires, pen testing, security rating services. We'll get into those a little bit later. But it shows you that this is a pervasive problem. Next slide, please. Oh, good. So yeah, what this comes down to is, regardless that the fact that many businesses have developed sophisticated programs for securing the software they build, the software they buy continues to be a black box in terms of understanding the risk embedded within. So meaning that organizations, even in the wake of SolarWinds, even in the wake of 3CX, even in the wake of CodeCough, are failing to answer the fundamental question of, is the software that I bring into my organization safe? Is it safe to use? Is it safe to deploy? Is it safe to host customer data? So again, understanding and lifting the black box that is commercial software is of the utmost importance to a lot of CISO circles, third-party risk organizations, GRC organizations. So that's something that is top of mind for a lot of businesses. Next slide, please. So when I talk about how current approaches are not built to task, I want to kind of call those out and kind of define what I mean by that. So as far as existing TPRM methods, third-party risk management methods, these tools, while important and do serve a purpose in their own right, are not built to scale with the growing software, and I want to underline that, the growing software footprint, and don't have insight into the actual commercial software package itself, the package that you're ultimately going to be deploying to your IT environment. So questionnaires, for example, security vendor assessment questionnaires, rely on taking the vendor at their word and are manual and costly to implement. So you actually have to kind of take a leap of faith in a lot of aspects to know, if the vendor is actually practicing good due diligence and actually exercising secure coding hygiene before they actually ship their code and their package to production, or ship it to, bundle it up and you're actually shipping it to your IT environment. SBOMs, very hot topic right now, and again, very much serve a purpose, especially in terms of meeting compliance standards. But at the end of the day, it's just a list of ingredients. And a lot of software provider, excuse me, a lot of SBOM providers out there will only hone in on the open source components within that software package. So proprietary and commercial components as well are things that have to be called for. And not only that, again, they don't have a good assessment of mapping to software supply chain threat vectors. Vulnerabilities, maybe, but what about malware? What about exposed secrets? What about suspicious behaviors? So again, it's a list of ingredients at the end of the day. Pen testing, largely a compliance driver, at least in my experience, because I've worked for multiple pen testing providers in the past. Costly to scale, for sure. I think that's not news for anybody these days. With inconsistent results, because again, with each subsequent pen test, you could be getting a different tester. The scope of the pen test, in order to kind of keep costs under control, has to have a defined scope. So again, you're missing a lot of potential attack vectors that could be at play there. And then finally, security rating services, for example, um, things that organizations that will actually do an external scan of a software of a vendor's internally facing, or excuse me, externally facing IT infrastructure to provide a letter grade like A through F or one through 100 to kind of assess the security posture or the risk posture of that business. But again, these are externally facing aspects of their IT infrastructure. So if they have a firewall, have they had any breaches in the past? Have they had any sensitive data leak to the dark web? Again, stuff you want to know, but in terms of insight into the software package itself, it doesn't provide that level of insight. And lastly, sandboxes, not a not a pervasive method of assessing commercial software, but working with customers, we have worked with customers who try to kind of pigeonhole sandboxes against a method of detonating commercial software packages. And the fact is that they're resource, again, much like pen testing, they're resource intensive, costly to scale, and there are some malware varieties that are actually can evade detection, like sort of time gated detection within a sandbox. Again, look no further than SolarWinds. Okay, so I'm going to take a breath for a moment and actually want to turn it to the audience real quick with a quick poll. Next slide here. So let's see. So kind of just to assess what is the level of confidence in your organization in terms of assessing third-party commercial software. So again, not getting too deep, just offhand, how confident are you? Not confident, somewhat confident, fairly confident, or very confident? You know, is this something that is top of mind for your business? And you know, do you think your business has the tools and methods in place to kind of make that assessment? So I'm going to give you folks a few more seconds to kind of get a temperature check.
And Joe, as we're kind of waiting for people to answer here, one of
Yeah.
the things that came to mind from just my pen test days, and might spell that DAZE because it was kind of that drinking out of the fire hose.
Mm-hmm.
Each one of the pen tests, the scope would be so narrowed because we only had so much time. So even using a pen test or even the sandboxes take a lot of time to scan, and to get the thorough scan, you're waiting. So those two are good methods, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of resources, and the pen test has to be scoped correctly to cover what you need.
Absolutely. All right. So the results are in.
Nice.
And we found that 57% of you are somewhat confident, 7% not confident at all, and 36% of you are fairly confident.
Nice.
0% of you were very confident. So again, good to see. So it definitely, this says to me that there is definitely some room for improvement in this realm. It sounds like the audience have taken some measures to take action on this problem, but it sounds like there's definitely room for improvement. And the fact that no one said that they are very confident is also telling to me.
Exactly.
All right. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Brian to kind of give you more of a sort of boots on the ground perspective in terms of how he's worked with customers to sort of operationalize third-party commercial risk assessment. So yeah, Brian, I'm not going to steal your thunder anymore, so I'm going to let you take it from here for a bit.
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate that. So the slide I chose here was of an assembly line. Just whenever I think of software development, and forgive me if I'm kind of preaching to the choir somewhat, sounds like a lot of people are kind of already familiar with some of these pieces and parts. I like to use the analogy of an assembly line here for software development. There are so many moving parts. It gets insanely complex. As you see the different robots here, each one has a different function. It has a different piece that it's doing. Development has started to get that way as well. When I was working with the developers, I would go and I would ask them a question, and they'd be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's the front end team. You have to go talk to them for that." And very rarely could somebody talk me through the entire application itself. They knew their pieces really well, but I'd usually have to go find a very senior architect that, had the experience, had that knowledge, had that time in the chair, so to speak, that they had seen it and experienced it. But even then, they didn't know everything and all those different pieces and parts. So software development in and of itself is very complex. When I was doing AppSec engineering, one of my favorite things to hear was a developer say, "Oh, it's easy." I knew it was going to blow up a mushroom quickly. There is, even though it could be easy for their piece, these are series of complex systems that we're putting together and calling an application. Commercial software is that same way. And again, Joe talked about it being a black box. I like this idea of this assembly line, encouraging each one of us to think of software development. Whoever's developing the software that we're using has this assembly line that they're going through. What could possibly go wrong? Now, as a pen tester, I love that question. And usually most people would say, well, not a lot, until we showed up on site. And then a lot could go wrong. Here, within just even this simple analogy here, throw one little rock in there and now the robots can't move, or who knows, sand in the gears type of thing. There's so many things that can go wrong. And what do we trust here out of this whole assembly line? Do we trust it all? Do we trust what the lines are doing, what they're producing? Is it reliable? This is the same way with software development, be it in our CI/CD pipelines, what have you. Things can go wrong, and they do go wrong. You know, ask any of your DevOps people. I'm sure they've got some horror stories from the trenches. So if I can do the next slide here. So as we're going through, and again, kind of talking to probably other security people out there, as soon as you see this picture, you probably start laughing, and it's like, yes, it's obvious. That little straw piece is going to be the weakest link of the chain. But what if we don't know what the weakest link is? When I go out and I purchase commercial software, I have to have some level of trust. What happens when the vendor that I know is trustworthy has something go wrong? Like back in that assembly line picture, something went wrong that they weren't aware of. We've had a lot of media exposure about that recently with different vendors who have had that happen. Some malicious actor got into the pipeline, was able to inject, say, malware or other nefarious software into their build. It went out live. Now everybody else, good security practitioners, see that there's an update, want to grab it, make sure that they're using the latest greatest. Well, now the latest greatest comes with a few extra bells and whistles that you don't really want. And again, it's a black box. What views do we have? How do we go about finding that weak link? And honestly, I have been that guy that's asked for source code from companies. When they stop laughing, yes, they did tell me no. I've also asked for SCA findings, SAST findings. You know, do you have DAS scans that you're doing? Do you have sandboxes that you're using? Very few vendors want to share that information. I mean, that's really underneath the covers, right? That's sharing some very sensitive information. Hence where Joe was talking earlier about SBOMs. SBOMs is a way of at least sharing something. Even with those questionnaires, there's certain questions that certain vendors know to avoid or to answer in certain ways, that it's true, but not exactly 100% true. The questionnaires, you know, can be biased in one way or another. The biggest thing here with our chain that you see there is really assessing the risk, finding out what is that weak link. Might be security, might be a legal aspect, might even be financial aspect for the commercial vendor themselves. And this is where a lot of the processes we've had in place work, you know, the legal, the finance side, but the security side, how do you evaluate that black box? So let's go to the next slide here. One of the advantages that I've had since I've been here at ReversingLabs is working with some of our larger financial institution customers. One specific one came to mind, and I see them as being a big success story, not only for ReversingLabs, but also for their processes and procedures as well. This specific financial institution, what they would do is someone would make a request. Hey, I want to use the latest, greatest version of commercial software XYZ. That would start the clock ticking. They would usually tell them it'd take at least a month to do the review. I had another financial institution tell me that a month would be a dream for them. They were taking 3 months to even 4, maybe even 5 months to do these reviews. This specific organization that I was working with was doing in a month, and they were scanning for malware. So they would grab whatever this new binary, this new application was, scan it with antivirus. They had multiple antiviruses that they would scan. The problem there is that, as we all know, malware doesn't usually scan really large files, might not find 0 days, might not find rootkits, might not find very customized things that the software itself is meant to do, but is being exploited in some way. Malware can't really tell us that. Antivirus can't really tell us that. Now, if I did embed, using my pen test tools, if I did embed a known piece of malware in there, yes, they'll tell me that does have that piece of malware in there. In addition, this financial institution was also scanning for vulnerabilities using vulnerability scanners, making sure that no CVEs were popping out, which are common vulnerability exposures. That's typically what vulnerabilities are associated with, is a CVE via the National Vulnerability Database, or OSV. Then they were also doing open source intelligence as well. Almighty Google, going out to Google, is there any problems with this application? What have other people seen? They were also using multiple sandboxes, which, as they reported, became very expensive for them, because with each commercial software that was being requested, there was multiple scans that they were having to do with the sandboxes. It would take a long period of time, and depending upon the application, some web applications would never finish if you're really trying to point a sandbox at it. Then in addition, they were verifying checksums, hashes. They were doing questionnaires. They were reviewing SBOMs when they were available. And then, kind of their last and final thing was just cross their fingers and hope for the best. After working with them, they had at least policies and procedures already in place for how to make the request, so that they were already kind of ready to go from that point of view. Once the request was made, they did purchase Spectra Assure from us, from ReversingLabs. And what they were able to do is quickly turn around our reports. They would scan, upload whatever application, do the scan, and they immediately had a good threat profile and understood where the majority of the risks were. This financial organization has actually been successful in sharing our reports back with some vendors and having some vendors mitigate things. Granted, that is rare, and a lot of vendors, when I've reached out to them, I've been told a lot of things about the FBI showing up my door and stuff as well. So I know a lot of vendors aren't exactly eager to do that. But this specific financial institutions had, they're very large, so they carry some weight in the industry. And when they were sharing these reports, a lot of vendors did make changes for them. The issue, once they did do all their manual processes, is how would they actually track this over time? Well, with ReversingLabs, now they have a record of all the different scans that they've done, and they can even see differences between the versions of the software to know if that development team has security in mind. Are they security conscious and aware? Are they actually doing what they need to do to increase security or decrease it? So they could see that very quickly and easily within our portal as well. So if we can go to the next slide here. And then I've got my favorite little thing here is about threat modeling. And it's more kind of a Brianism, so to speak. And I think the little threat dragon guy's name is Cupcake, but I'm not too sure. But I always like having Cupcake around here. Threat modeling is a great way, even if you don't have our tool, even if you have really no tools available, threat modeling is a good way to get people thinking about the risks that they're trying to introduce. I remember I had one organization that they had to have this commercial software. They had to have it. We did some quick threat modeling with them, and they realized that, well, wait, ultimately from threat modeling, I like to go back to the threat modeling manifesto, and it has 4 main questions. What are we working on? What could go wrong? One of my favorite ones, what can go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do it a good enough job? So using the threat modeling manifesto and addressing my favorite pieces, the inputs and the outputs, I had success with this organization trying to bring in this commercial application. Once they started looking at it, they realized the inputs, they were inputting a lot of sensitive information, and the outputs was sending that sensitive information back to a site online that nobody had access to, that the vendor promised us it was secure. So even from a quick conversation in a threat modeling environment, we were able to identify that there's some risks here, and the vendor did not provide any reassurance to us at all. With threat modeling, you can identify the risks and then go back to what I always joke is, when you're dealing with risk management, it's like money. So it's ATM. I use that little acronym for addressing risks. You can accept, transfer, or mitigate, hence the ATM. So with threat modeling, that gives you at least something that you can be doing. And it also starts to get people thinking security And you can start to develop internal security champions, maybe even outside of orgs that you never considered before. Developers are typically, some developers want to be security champions. I had a lot of success with architects as well. Even Scrum managers at some point started to pay more attention to security as well. That's all from the application development side. But I even had GRC people who were being security champions and wanted to go deeper as well. The threat modeling got people thinking. So I always like to bring that up. I always kind of have that as an ace in my card deck, as so to speak. So if we can go to next slide here, I think we have another poll coming. And Joe, if you can take it away.
Of course. Yeah. So actually, in that spirit, kind of talking about finding internal security champions to kind of take ownership of security risk, be it from commercial software. Who owns security? Who owns Who owns commercial software risk at your organization? Because again, it's not always the third party. It's not always the risk management organization. It could be AppSec, could be IT, could even be SecOps, for example. So we'll take a moment and kind of get a pulse check again. See if the assumptions hold true in terms of who owns third party commercial software risk.
Joe, we could have put another one on here. We could have just said Brian at the end, because that's the role I always played.
Yeah.
So
if every company could have a Brian, I think we'd all be better off.
Maybe, depending on the day. Yep. So be very interested in how people answer this one. So
all right, give some folks maybe like 5 more seconds, 6 more seconds. 12. All right. I think that's good. Okay. So kind of an even distribution here, which again, kind of what kind of asserts my, which kind of underlines my assumption is that again, this is not always a hard and it's not always a defined swim lane in terms of owning commercial software risk. It kind of is a shared responsibility across multiple organizations. So we're seeing an even distribution across TPRM, SecOps, and even IT having a stake in this, and other. So other could be, can only assume other could be procurement, maybe legal, maybe someone else. Again, maybe someone we didn't consider. So yeah, thank you folks for that we're able to that we're willing to kind of share these results. Let's kind of continue with the conversation. So Brian again thank you again for kind of giving it more of a boots on the ground perspective of what customers have sort of been doing to address this problem. So what we're proposing in terms of what we're talking to customers and talking to organizations that are really looking to solve this problem is the notion of instituting complex binary analysis as a way to close the gap that are left behind by sort of these more classic software assessment methods. This helps on multiple fronts. First is that it closes the gap in some of the more piecemeal, maybe surface level methods like again your vulnerability your vulnerability assessment, your pen testing, your sandboxing, and kind of getting into a more deeper binary level understanding of the underlying risks, the embedded risks and threats within that software package. Things again like malware, tampering, suspicious behaviors, vulnerabilities, and others as well. It helps again on another front too, is that eliminating a lot of the unnecessary costs that come with some of the tool sprawl in terms of implementing some of these more disparate tools. So eliminating things like pigeonholing sandboxes to assessing commercial software and minimizing your pen testing costs on applications or critical business applications that maybe don't necessitate a pen test. If you're doing it for compliance, that's one thing. But if you're doing it to kind of get a broad stroke understanding of that software's commercial software risk standing, there's a more cost-effective way of doing that. So with that, next slide, please. So again, this is a ReversingLabs webinar, so we do want to kind of introduce what we do offer in terms of solving this problem. That is our Spectra Assure solution that Brian alluded to. So again, a Spectra Assure does exactly what I described earlier, is that it fills the gap left behind by manual, superficial risk assessment methods by delivering a comprehensive risk analysis of commercial software to, again, expose things like malware, tampering, vulnerabilities, and other threat vectors by recursively unpacking the software package at the binary level. So we do this without requiring any sort of source code. So when I talk about recursively unpacking, I think that's actually a good segue to go to the next slide to kind of digest what that means exactly. Next slide real quick. So again, Spectra Assure is powered by our complex binary analysis engine, which again is the catalyst of to initiate a process that we call recursive unpacking. So recursive unpacking essentially uses high-speed binary analysis to identify, de-archive, de-obfuscate, and unpack the underlying object structure of the application of the software package, including in things like embedded executables, libraries, documents, resources, and icons. So in other words, you kind of think of it as sort of a Russian doll with recursively unpacking each layer of the software package to expose another hidden layer of potential threats and risk. So again, because Spectra Assure and the complex binary analysis engine that powers it doesn't require any sort of source code, it doesn't require any sort of source code execution. It can deconstruct even the largest and most complex packages in minutes instead of hours. And so, in fact, by our benchmarks, we were actually able to unpack a 1 GB package in as little as 5 minutes, just to kind of give you an example. So each DLL, each container and artifact are ultimately classified with a risk category and ranking, and we synthesize that into a comprehensive risk assessment that you can actually use to make more educated risk decisions on the software that you ultimately deploy to your environment. In terms of how we can help you operationalize that, let's go to the next slide if we can. Thank you. So again, we help customers make educated, operationalized third-party software risk assessments and make informed risk decisions across the entire software consumption lifecycle. And we do that through multiple phases. So we have the first phase, which is the acquisition phase, or acquiring a commercial software. So that could either be making an assessment between multiple vendors that are in the assessment pipeline, and the which one that you actually sign the contract for is actually determined by a risk assessment. So we can actually help you make that go or no go decision and expedite the turnaround time of when you actually have that application deployed ultimately with a more non-invasive testing. That being that we don't require any source code. So again, the acquisition process is streamlined, and you're actually able to streamline that across multiple vendors if you actually need to again make that informed risk decision to make sure that you're going with the most secure vendor partner in that aspect. Secondly is the actual deployment, of the application. So Spectra post deployment, you've signed the contract, you've deployed the application. Spectra Assure actually provides a clear written guidance on the impact of individual security issues that might crop up. So, and along with a step-by-step remediation guide on how to fix them. So what this means is that this guidance, as new versions or new updates and new issues might crop up over the lifespan of the application, you can actually make the determination as whether the issue is either too risky to deploy, which means you actually have to maybe decommission the application, or provide actual guidance on what you can do to put a possible mitigating control in place. So again, working with your SecOps team it's like, hey, we have the potential malware. Is this something that is there some sort of control we have in place to actually safeguard? Because again, we can't afford to decommission the application, but at the same time, we want to have a control in place. So this is within our realm of acceptable risk. We just want to make sure we have the right controls in place to, again, contain the blast radius if something terrible were to happen, so to speak. Next is maintaining the application. So history has shown that even when the current version of a piece of software is safe, that doesn't necessarily mean that each patch, each update, each new version is going to be just as safe. and each one can introduce unforeseen threat vectors. So this is why Spectra Assure actually helps mitigate that with a version-to-version differential analysis to track how previous issues of the application has been addressed. If those issues that were cropped up in an old report, have those been addressed yet? And subsequently, are there any new issues we need to be worrying about or need to be alerted to with with a subsequent update or patch? So we provide that mechanism so that instead of automatically pushing out updates, we can provide sort of that security gate before you actually push those updates out across your environment. And these risk assessments that we produce aren't contained in a bubble either. So Brian actually alluded to a banking customer that he was working with that are actually able to share reports with their vendors, and we actually provide that mechanism within the product itself by way of our shareable reports feature. So by that, we're actually able to providing a mechanism to actually share the report directly with your vendors through a secure and private link. And the reason that helps is to help foster collaboration and kind of more expedited remediation for critical fixes. Now, again, there might be some extraneous measures that need to be put in place. Again, your contract language comes into play. How much pull do you have with your vendor ecosystem? So those are definitely things to put into place. But in terms of actually removing those communication barriers, so you and your vendor are seeing the same thing in terms of what risks are most prevalent, we provide that mechanism to actually showcase that and share that directly with your vendor partners. Next slide, please. All right. And the last thing I want to kind of touch on in terms of the final piece of the software consumption lifecycle is how we help monitor for new and emerging threats that might pop up. And by new and emerging threats, I'm talking about novel threats like a log4j, for example, or the next log4j, I should say, or the next XZ. So when those alerts, when those disclosures do pop up in the ecospheres, for example, our solution as part of our risk assessment is also to populate a queryable SBOM, which can be used in the event that a zero-day disclosure hits the net. You want to do a quick query as to whether or not you're exposed to this potential threat vector, this novel zero-day threat. So again, this is more of an importance of why having an actionable and complete bill of materials, that encapsulates more than just open source, is critical in these kinds of regards, because again, there are certain instances where it may not necessarily be an open source component that is being targeted. It could be any aspect of your any artifact within your commercial software package. All right. And that's all we had. So with that, again, thank you all for coming. We want to open it up to questions if we can. And I think there's actually been a handful that have been, there's actually quite a few handful that have popped up in the chat. So let's start with a handful of these. Who are our competitors? Question from our chat. And who are our competitors and how are we different from FireEye is a question that came up. Brian, do you want to give your take on this, and I can help you fill in the gaps, or how do you want to handle that one?
Well, one of the things with competitors, we're kind of in a new area with the software supply chain security. So we kind of leading the forefront somewhat with that. So there's not a direct competitor that we have that does exactly what we do, but we have some other competitors, like for the malware reporting. VirusTotal can show you all the different malware vendors. That's one piece that we do. I wouldn't consider them necessarily competition, but that would be one person that would come to mind, VirusTotal. And then how are we different from FireEye? Unfortunately, I haven't used FireEye in years, so I'm not too sure exactly what FireEye has continued to develop and work on. I know from our perspective, we are scanning those binaries, those applications, showing any tampering that's potentially there, any behavioral modifications. I can see differences with behaviors from one application to another. Being a pen tester, if something is opening up TCP sockets and it wasn't before, hey, that draws my attention. So I think with FireEye, we have a different level of view into what the application is doing because we're doing static analysis. Now, Joe, I see another question about false positives on here that I'm going to just jump into here. Because we're doing static analysis, we have an extremely low false positive rate. Because what we're doing is we're deconstructing and unpacking all these different applications, we're seeing the calls that they are making. There's been a lot of calls that I've been on with customers where they've said, hey, we're not using zlib version, whatever, whatever. And lo and behold, some other application was actually calling that none of the development teams were aware of. So we have an extremely false positive rate. Hopefully that helps a little bit with the question of differentiation with FireEye. You know, at least one of our competitors mentioned there. But Joe, is there anything else that came to mind while I was talking there?
Yeah, I mean, we've as through our research, we have not there, as far as our research shows, there is not really another company that is doing what we're doing in terms of assessing commercial software packages at the level that we assess them. Now, granted, you have, again, static analysis, you have SAS tools, DAS tools, like your traditional AppSec tools, but again, those are more for the software producers, your ISVs who are assessing source code. We provide a way for the recipient of that software package, the actual enterprise buyer, to assess that without the need for source code. And again, a lot of those testing methods are looking solely at CVEs and vulnerabilities, whereas we're looking through the broad spectrum of software supply chain threats, vulnerabilities included, but also things like malware, tampering, exposed secrets, suspicious behaviors, licensing issues. I could go into I could go into a tangent, but again, want to be sensitive to some of the folks here. So again, there are competitors that compete with us with for the software producer use case that we cater to. But in terms of the enterprise buyer, a commercial software risk assessment, there's really no one doing what we're doing in that regard. All right. Couple questions relating to, I'll try to answer this as best I can. What is your answer? The question related to an earlier poll question. What is your answer to the same question? Are you very confident? Probably assuming if we're confident in our own commercial software risk assessment, and have you analyzed the analyzer? If so, what was the report looking like? Not sure I can disclose that last part because I'm not sure what it looks like, and B, if I did, I probably wouldn't be able to disclose that. But we eat our own dog food. That much I can tell you in that regard. I don't know, Brian, if you want to add any additional color to that.
Well, yeah, all eager here. It's like, yes, we do use our own tools, and they are in our own CI/CD pipelines. Each build, we're scanning, we're seeing what's there, we're addressing and remediating. So yes, we are, as Joe said, eating our own dog food. As far as our confidence level, we're all security guys. We know that a lot of stuff can go wrong. So I wouldn't say that we're, 100% confident, because there's always that unknown variable. But I'd say we're very confident in what we're releasing out to the public, because we are scanning, we are determining what's in there, and we get clear scan results before we post or before we deploy. So of
course. All right.
Great questions though. I love what you guys are thinking. Yep.
Yeah, I know. It's always prevalent to ask those questions. Okay. How do you check if patch contains is malicious? Do you check only patch or the whole software entirely?
The whole software. Once you upload a binary, we're checking that entire binary. So if there's a patch that's been associated, what has to be a part of that binary itself. So back in the old days of Windows, they do the service packs. Well, we would get that version of Windows, including the service pack and scan yet. So hopefully that answers that one.
Okay. And a couple more questions, kind of more related to capabilities. Can Spectra software be used on premise, on standalone, with again, no network connectivity machine? So kind of like an air gapped approach. I'm assuming the question is relating to.
Thanks. And we can do an on-prem version. We do have a command line tool that all it sends back is some limited telemetry data back to us. So you can't keep everything on site there too. So yeah. And I see a question about what we support. I'm going to put that in my chat here. And if the powers can make sure everybody gets that, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, of course. So, yeah. So Brian just posted something in the general chat window that relates It's a link to our docs page, which should give you everything we need. It should give you everything you need in terms of what's our coverage, what our file types we support, which is dozens upon dozens upon dozens. If to kind of
Yep, exactly.
thank
And
you.
that's a great question too. So hopefully that link comes through for the person asking that question. Because yeah, we do support quite a bit. So,
Okay.
the
Kenny, I see you raising your hand. If you, by all means, if you want to put your question into the chat, we're happy to answer that live if you want. In the meantime, got one more question here. What would Spectra Assure provide over a pen test in assessing a third-party software package?
Ooh, nice. Depends upon your scope. How wild are you letting the pen testers go, and how much time do they have to dig in? There could be that one function call that they just never have time to get to, that's the keys of the kingdom. So I'm very hesitant and leery about pen testing as a way of covering everything. If you have something very targeted that you want to find out for, I think pen testing is fantastic. And I'm kind of biased. I think pen testing is the best way to go for that. When you're looking for overall scope of everything, I don't think pen testing an application is going to get you that level. So some rough differences there. Hopefully that gives you some ideas too to go off of. Joe, anything that came to mind for you for that one?
No, I think that's it. I think again, like I said, pen test, historically speaking, from my past lives, has largely been a compliance driver, and I think they still exist in terms of as a security assessment method. But again, I think there's language. I think most of people that come to pen test do it so for compliance requirements. So again, if there's room to, if that is a, if there is room to kind of make room in your budget to kind of do away with some of that security testing that you might be doing with pen testing, I would say give complex binary analysis a look at again.
And
But
one
again,
suggestion, if you do have to do the pen testing, do a white box for application testing. There's no point in trying to have the pen tester figure things out. It'd just take too long. And I personally, I think that's a waste of your resources. Do a white box application penetration test. That way you can target specific things, specific areas. So, but that's, pen testing according to Brian. So
So I think that should be a wrap for, if there's no other, let me just take one more double check. One more double check for questions. I think we got all those. Okay, I think we're almost at the top of the hour anyway. So again, I want to be thoughtful for everyone's time. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Just some quick food for thought for some extra sessions we have coming up this week. Today, we talked about more of a topic. We had a more topical conversation about kind of assessing third-party software risk. If you're interested in actually seeing the product in action, we'll be showcasing that on Thursday this week at, let's see, 12 p.m. Eastern time. I'll actually be hosting that myself with my esteemed colleague Joshua Knox. We just call him Knox. And we also have some other sessions coming up. Again, more topical and very kind of some actually pretty stellar lineup in terms of guest speakers. Cassie Crosley, who former VP, actually current VP of Software Supply Chain Security at Schneider Electric, will be joining us for a discussion on July 11th. And we actually have Steve Spinget, chair of the Cyclone DX SBOM standard at OWASP, joining us for a conversation on July 24th. So both those sessions will be coming up. Feel free to register on our website. And again, like with any session that we conduct, these will be applicable for CPE credits should you join. So yeah, good stuff coming down the pipe. So I hope you folks can take the time to join. With that, I think that's a wrap. Again, thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of your week. Take care.